Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another video. Today's video is going to be an offlane tier list for patch 7.34e, and just like I said in the last 2 days, this tier list, and probably all the tier lists going forward, unless people don't like this version, are going to be more for your average pub, so not just necessarily for the highest end 10k MMR, immortal pubs, which I'm still going to look at all the stats and all the win rates and pick rates and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to base it off of the general meta at the highest MMR, and obviously the best way to gain MMR is generally to pick the broken heroes, and that still counts. That's still what you should probably do, but especially in the mid tier of how good certain heroes are, right around the middle or even into the A tier, what's good is often different in the average MMR pub versus the highest tier. So I'm going to take that into account, and this is mostly for those kinds of players, because honestly my channel, my content is geared towards newer players anyway, so I think this might be more fitting for that. So that's what I'm doing here going forward. So anyway, this is the offlane tier list for this patch, and let's just jump into the first tier, which is Wraith King, and this is still really good in the offlane. It was a carry for a long time, and I think they nerfed it just slightly, but I barely. Honestly, this past patch, the E patch, it didn't really do much. There was a couple heroes that got some decent nerfs, and there was a little bit of buffs here and there, but a lot of the heroes stayed almost exactly the same. And this hero was picked in the offlane a lot, and now it's still picked in the offlane, really because this hero has a stun. This hero has a lot of things that some offlaners have. I mean, it always kind of has. Has a stun, has lifesteal, like sustainability, pretty tanky, and now has extra push with those skeletons. And the skeletons have recently been buffed, not like in the last patch, but over the last 6 months or so, they've been buffed, maybe even over the last year, and now it's very, very hard to deal with them. You can push down towers extremely quickly, extremely easily, so you're kind of this like early game timing hero where you have a decent laning stage, you have a stun, and you kind of also become more of a carry, and that's another reason why this hero is really good in the offlane, is because now with the expanded map that happened last year, or over the past year, it's just more viable to have like farming heroes in the offlane, like a second carry in the offlane. Now you still want them to have some dynamic ability to stun and initiate and these kinds of things, but it seems like carries are getting picked more in the offlane, usually strength heroes, but still. So this hero is perfect for that, and it's honestly really all about the skeletons. It's a lot about initiating with your stun and critting people to death later in the game and going on the back line, but for the most part during the early game, and the reason why this hero is able to play that position is because the skeletons are just so good. They push so quickly, and it's obviously insane to deal with early in the game. You don't have much spell clear and all that kind of stuff, so you can easily get that tier 1 tower and even tier 2 towers really early in the game, and that's the strength of Wraith King. I think later in the game, he's obviously a carry, so you just have 2 carries then. Next we have Bristleback, and this hero was good like a long time ago when it had a different Ags, and then they changed the Ags and people weren't really sure if it was going to be viable or not. I think the hero was really bad for like the first 6 months of this year or so, and then they finally changed it, and people were like, oh, this hero might actually be good. Now it's kind of becoming viable, and people are realizing this Ags is almost like more coherent for the style of this hero and how it's supposed to be, because the old Ags was sort of this weird thing where you used to like beat people and kind of man fight them, but that's not really what you want to do with Bristleback. And so the new Ags is more about turning your back to them and doing a lot of quill damage and all that kind of stuff. And so this hero I think is not as good of a carry at lower MMRs, which I already talked about in the carry list, but from the offlane, it is a carry from the offlane, but also does typical offlane things. It's like super tanky, hard to deal with, good laning stage, can snowball the game, and then also you do insane damage later on in the game, can buy tanky strength items, like even pipe and stuff for your team, and then still do insane damage and be a menace later in the game. It's really, really hard to deal with, because if basically, if they don't deal with you, they just try to ignore the Bristleback and kill everyone else, they're just going to die. That's pretty much just going to happen. You're just going to run in, you even go to the back lines or something, even to the carry, and just use your Ags and just like quill everybody down full to 0. It's actually insane. And so that's honestly the biggest thing with this hero, is you can now kind of play more carry from the offlane, so that's why he's getting picked more there, and now he does insane damage with his Ags. That's really what it is. Then I'm putting Chaos Knight up here still, even though he did get nerfed and he's not as popular. I still think in the lower MMRs, he's still really, really good. Now, I know that, the lifesteal and all these kinds of things, sustainability isn't that great, but I still think it's enough that you can still farm really well, and you can still be very, very effective in team fights, and you're basically a carry from the offlane. It's just you don't have to care that later in the game you're going to fall off. So if you can hit this, Echo Saber heart timing, or Armlet Echo Saber heart timing, you have this insane timing where just nobody can deal with you, and then you also have this other carry to fall back on that's your actual safe lane carry that can carry late game, but you have those early game timings where you're insane, and then even later in the game, I mean, you're still going to be doing a lot of damage, just that maybe your illusions are going to die more, you're not, you know, the tankiness isn't going to be as worthwhile, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be harder for you to kill supports because they have more items, all those things, so, but you're not reliant on being the sole carry like you would be, obviously, if you picked it in the 1 position, so you can easily pick it in the 3 position, and it's like a Wraith King, where you have a stun, you have these other abilities that allow you to not just be like kind of useless after a certain point, or, you know, just a carry that doesn't have any kind of stun or control or anything like that. So that's why I think Chaos Knight is still really good despite the nerfs. And the last hero in the S tier is Necrophos, and Necrophos is really good at higher MMRs, but I think the lower you go, the better he is. People don't know how to deal with this hero. He's extremely annoying in the laning stage, then just deletes people later on, is a great counter to all these tanky strength heroes, does ridiculous amounts of damage, and is hard to catch now with his shard and all that kind of stuff. The heart build with the Ags and all that stuff, you just melt people. Where like in the past, I think a few years ago, he used to do percentage-based damage on his Heartstopper aura. They took that away and made it like flat damage. I think that's what it was. And I think since then, he hasn't really come back into the meta. But now with the Ags and with the heart and with getting super tanky and very annoying, hard to bring down, can do a ton of damage. Also paired up with heroes like Grimstroke, which are pretty popular right now. This hero is just very, very hard to deal with, very good later in the game. You can get countered a little bit once people get items and, you know, can deal with you a little bit more. It's harder later in the game to be as impactful, but that's why you are an offlaner. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You can get out of these situations because you are tankier. Like in the past, I think, because of the build you're going in the past, you know, if they did counter you with magic damage, or if they did counter you by buying items that, you know, dispel you and stuff like that, it was almost, you were just dead. Like once they did that, if you couldn't just press W and get out, you were just dead. Now I think you're tanky enough that, like, honestly, just because you're getting dispelled or because you're getting gone on and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die, because you are going straight up like strength tanky items. You have 3 to 4k HP. It's very hard to deal with you. And all the while, you're melting people down. I think that's just why this hero is so good right now. And again, lower MMR, harder to deal with that hero. Next, we have A tier. All these heroes are pretty much just, you know, your traditional offlaners that are pretty good right now. We have Centaur. I think he's just overall pretty good. I didn't like him in the past, but he has been played more and more, so I think he's actually pretty good. He's very tanky. He's very annoying with his hoof stomps and his double edge and all this kind of stuff. I think it's just, he can be underwhelming because unlike a Bristleback and some of these other heroes, you can kind of ignore him a little bit. Like, he doesn't do a ton of damage, so in that way I don't love him, but he is getting picked at the higher levels, and he is just consistent. And so that's why I think he's good in lower levels, because at a certain point, even though you can ignore him a little bit more than maybe some other heroes, he's just going to get so tanky and so annoying to deal with and so hard to kill that you're going to have impact in the fights, almost certainly. And you have a stun that's relatively low cooldown, pretty easy to hit now with the ability to move while you're casting it and all that kind of stuff. And the save, the global save, I think is also just really, really good and has a lot of impact. I honestly debated putting him in B tier, but I think he is strong enough now that he can be in A tier. Even though he doesn't like straight up carry the game, it's just so hard to bring him down, like I said, in lower MMRs. And then we have Axe. This hero is just a traditional, decent offlaner. Not as good in the higher MMRs, but I think lower MMRs, you just cannot count out the amount of damage this hero does if you're able to get off a lot of dunks, get a lot of armor, and then also a BKB piercing stun is always going to be very, very good. So I think this hero is just probably of like the traditional, you know, typical offlaners. This hero is one of the best right now. These offlaners are more like carry from the offlane. Centaur is pretty good, but I think Axe is honestly really just better the lower MMR you go, because the more impact he's going to have in terms of just like surprising people and just doing pure damage is also really, really good. Then we have Legion Commander. This hero's kind of fallen off a bit. I think it was kind of broken in the past, but I still think in lower MMRs, this hero's a beast, because this hero, ever since they changed it, they switched up what was the attack speed and the movement speed on both of her abilities. I think she just is going to be a menace at lower MMRs. You are the carry from the off lane, and now you're even better at that than you used to be, and you're just going to pick people off constantly. You're going to get 500-600 damage if the game goes late because of all the duels you're going to be winning, because people just don't know how to, you know, play against this hero and how not to farm waves. And that's another thing too. If people at kind of your average pub, if they're going to just group up as 5, it's probably not going to be very good for them, because they're not going to be efficiently farming, and you and your team could just farm away and just get more net worth than them. And if they are If they're not doing that, they're probably not coordinating, like, baiting some guy out there, waiting behind him. Like, that's just not happening a lot. So if they're split pushing, if they're farming alone, you're going to be able to kill them with this hero 9 times out of 10. Then Slardar is kind of one of these heroes that it is a little bit matchup dependent. Sometimes it can feel underwhelming, but sometimes you just absolutely delete everybody. So I would say probably watch a replay of someone playing this hero really well and stomping with it, because then you realize, okay, you know how to play it, where to push your limits, because that's kind of all. You don't want to just run in and get countered in terms of just like, if someone turns on you, he's a little bit of like a squishy all-in, just permabash you and you die kind of thing. So you have to pick and choose your spots, pick and choose your fights. But if you are able to kind of snowball the game, if you have good matchups, your minus armor can be really good against, heroes that don't have a lot of armor, all that kind of stuff, then you can honestly just like carry the game by yourself. And so that's why I think this hero's up there, because it's very hard for people to deal with this hero in the lane. There's a lot of coordination that can happen there. This counters invisible heroes, which in lower MMRs is really good because people just don't buy Duster Sentries and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I like Slardar up here, even though probably at the higher MMRs he's not as good. I put him up here because of the way that you can just kind of snowball. And you also take Roche very well. So he just does a little bit of everything. The only thing he doesn't really do is take high ground, but because you're an offlaner, you don't really need to do that. He's just this right clicker, stunner, initiator. He does a little bit of everything, minus armor, all the things you want. And then Magnus, his laning stage is not the best. He's kind of weak. You can skewer people under tower. You can kind of like use your shockwave and stuff and get some farm. But I think it's just the fact that the map is so big now. There's so many camps. You're going to get your farm. You're going to get your blink. You're going to be annoying. You're going to get insane RPs off, and you're going to have insane team fight impact. It's just how it's going to go when you pick Magnus these days. So I know that maybe this hero isn't the best at the higher MMRs. I think he's still decent, but I think at lower MMRs, if you're a good Magnus player, you can get out of the early game in the laning stage without like feeding too much and with getting a decent amount of farm, and then you can have insane impact. Then Spirit Breaker, this hero has been nerfed a little bit because it was a little bit broken, and I still think it's very, very good. Maybe not as good as it once was, but this hero is similar in a sense to Legion Commander, where people just like can't split push against you. It's very hard for them to do that, and if they just still do it, you just solo pick them off. And then in team fights later in the game, like, you're just stunning everybody. You're super annoying. You can lock down their carry full to 0, and it's just very, very hard to deal with you. And you're elusive too, so it's like you don't get punished as much for being out of position with this kind of hero as you do with some other heroes. So that's why Spirit Breaker is very good. And then lastly, it's kind of a cheese hero, Lone Druid. I think maybe better as a mid, but still very good as an offlaner, not as good as a carry. But this hero is pretty good right now. You're just playing carry from the offlane. It's definitely very viable right now. I'm not a Lone Druid player, but if you are and you can learn how to play this hero, be very good at it, I think you can just stomp games from like mid or offlane with it. Next, we have B tier. All these heroes, I think, are just pretty standard, decent offlaners, not the best. Night Stalker has his games, has his moments, can be good, but obviously has weaknesses, and those weaknesses are always the same. It's just a matter of, if this hero's broken, it's because his weaknesses don't matter as much, and when he's strong, he's insane. I just don't think it's at that point right now, but in lower MMRs, you can definitely snowball and just crush games. Like, I've seen some Night Stalkers just take over games single-handedly, jump the backlines, the insane vision that you give, and that's the other thing too. It makes team fighting a lot easier at lower MMR, where people aren't as coordinated. If you just see the whole fight when you just press R, like, it just makes it so much easier to play the game for you and your teammates. Then Kunkka, still pretty good, even though he got nerfed. Despite all those nerfs, I still think he's decent. Not the best, but overall still does everything that Kunkka's been doing and can still be very, very annoying. It's just that you better have kind of carry from the mid and carry from the carry position, because if you have too much control, too much of this tankiness kind of stuff from the offlane, there's a lot more carries kind of with a lot of damage being picked in the offlane, so you can just add more control. But if you're not killing anyone, that kind of, it doesn't feel very good. Then Brewmaster, I put him in B, even though actually he probably should be in the normal, like, top 10k MMR tier list. He should be maybe A. I don't know if he would be S. Maybe he would even be S. But the reason why I put him down here is because I just don't think that you're going to be able to play around your ultimate. Not because you are bad, although I think you probably aren't going to be that good with the hero in general, because it is kind of a specialty hero. But because I think you just are really reliant on this ultimate, and you have to make sure that you're popping it at the right time. Your team is playing around it. They're committing when you're popping it, and you're not just popping it for no reason or at the bad time, or your team just doesn't commit. And so it's very much a team-oriented hero, and that's why I don't love it as much. But it can be very good. So it's not like terrible by any means in lower MMRs, but I don't think it's as good as it otherwise would be. Then DK, the reason why I put him up here is because I think at lower MMRs he can be way more effective. Now, I think at higher MMRs he can be taken advantage of. He has a lot of weaknesses, obviously, but at higher MMRs you can just kind of play like a carry. You can just be that secondary carry. You can get to your items. You can get your farm. You can go with the Midas and the Blink, BKB, Manta, Ags, and then maybe like Daedalus or something, and you just do insane damage. You're hard to deal with, and you can just carry from the offlane. That's kind of why I put him up here, because he's not going to get like bowled over or run over early, and he can get his farm and have his impact. Dawnbreaker, I think this is just where she is right now as an offlane, and in general, I think she's relatively good, has a good global save, has things about her where she can be high impact. I don't think she's the best right now, but she's kind of middle of the road average, just a decent offlaner. That's kind of the same thing with Primal Beast. The thing is, he's a brawler, he's a fighter. I don't really love that kind of style at lower MMRs or mid MMR because, that isn't always something you can take advantage of, but he does get his farm. He's very tanky. He can do a lot in the late game and team fights and all that kind of stuff. So, and from the offlane, you don't have to worry about that as much because you are the third core. But with all this carry from the offlane stuff that's being picked, I just don't love it as much as I otherwise would. So Razor, I think, is just decent. I actually put him up here because I think he can be a decent carry from the offlane, but I don't know that he's the best. It's just that it depends a lot on the situation. If anything, I might even put him C tier, but just if I compare him to some of these other heroes that I don't think are very good right now, especially at lower MMRs, I think he's simple to play, he's straightforward, and he can be pretty good. And so that's why I kind of put him up here, because he's just kind of like average, middle of the road, and kind of on the higher side of that, even though I don't love the hero right now. Then Viper, another one of those that's just like, he can be annoying, he can dominate lanes, he can be pretty good. He's not as good of a carry from the offlane in the sense of some of these other heroes are. He doesn't do everything you want to do. He's not very mobile. He has a lot of downsides, but I think you can stomp and win games with this hero for sure from the offlane. And then Earthshaker's been nerfed a lot, or just kind of hasn't seen nearly as much play as he once did maybe 6 months ago or so. But I think he's still viable. He's still definitely decent, even though he's not the best. I think at higher MMRs, he's one of those all or nothing heroes. He's either really, really good or kind of bad. I still think he's viable at the lower MMRs. That's why I'm putting him in B tier. And then lastly, we actually have Weaver. And this is just straight up 100%, you're just playing carry. And that's why he's B tier right now, because I think it's viable. I'm not going to say pick it every game. I'm not going to say pick it all the time. It's definitely, situational in the sense that you don't want to go all in with like no stuns on your team. It can feel really bad. You'd probably rather have like, a Wraith King than Weaver if you have no other stuns. But, if you have a team where there's a lot of stuns, maybe you do have a Wraith King carry. Maybe you do have a Bristleback, some other kind of like half carry, or another stunning mid or something like that. You can totally pick this Weaver hero as an offlaner and just be a carry in that position. That's definitely viable. I'm just not putting it higher than this because I don't think you should be picking it all that much. Then we have C tier. These are all like decent, viable heroes, but just not the best. Bounty can be just really good. In the right hands, in the right game, he can be a beast, but it just doesn't feel that strong. There's a lot of things that need to go right. The lane really needs to go right. You need to be able to hunt people down. You don't farm well otherwise. If you're not snowballing the game and farming, it feels really bad. And that's kind of why I don't put him very high, because it's just, you don't have a good farming steroid other than harassing and annoying people. And if your team isn't helping you do that, you can just feed sometimes. Then Dazzle, I think, is a decent offlaner. It's the same reason that I didn't put him very high as a mid. This hero probably would be very high offlane and mid, maybe S tier, maybe A tier, if it was a 10k MMR list. But again, I just don't think this hero is very good at lower MMRs in these core positions, because I don't think people know how to play it. Not just the people that are playing Dazzle, but the people playing around Dazzle as a core. I just don't think they're very good at that. They're very good at understanding the hero's limits and what it does and all that kind of stuff. And it is very much a team hero, because you're going to be healing, you're going to be graving, you're going to be doing all these things from the back line. And yes, it can be annoying. You can do a decent amount of damage, but you need to have a team that understands what the hero does and how to like coordinate with it to push its limits. And that's just not going to happen that much at lower MMRs. And then we have Sand King. So Sand King is just kind of your average offlaner. I think 6 months ago, he was very, very good. And then he kind of fell off because they nerfed him pretty heavily before TI, but he's just okay now. He's decent. I think the lower MMR you go, the better he is. He's just kind of your run-of-the-mill, okay landing stage, not the best. Good stun, but not the best. Kind of decent team fight hero, but not the best. There's all these little things about him that aren't the best, but he's still pretty good. Same thing with Pango. Has been nerfed a lot. Really, this hero's more of a mid these days, but can still play offlane. You can still get away with it, and it's still decent. Especially if you go late game, which happens a lot, and you get all your items, you can be a menace. And then Tidehunter, I think this hero's pretty good, especially with the new shard. But he does have weaknesses. He does have problems. There's a lot of breaks these days. A lot of people are buying breaks, and just like it can be more annoying for this hero to deal with all those different things. He doesn't feel as tanky as some of these other heroes. Like, we have a lot of tanky strength heroes right now, and this hero doesn't love buying heart. And I think that's one of the real reasons this hero's kind of lower on the totem pole, is because he doesn't buy heart. Like, it just feels like, why would you buy that? It's just kind of useless on the hero. You want to buy a lot of other stuff. Otherwise, I think he's average. He's pretty good. I would honestly put him higher if it wasn't for the fact that his teamfight ultimate is one of those things that at lower MMRs, it's not as impactful, because again, it feels like you can waste Ravage a lot if your team's just not on the same page as you. Timbersaw, okay, decent, but again, if you want to pick Timbersaw, just pick Bristleback. He's just a way worse version of Bristleback in some senses. Tanky, hard to deal with, good laning, will snowball the lane eventually, and then does damage late game, but Bristleback's just way better right now. Pudge, semi-viable. I just don't see it very much anymore. It's not as popular. Obviously, people still pick it because people love the hero, but it's not nearly as good. I think it's just semi-viable. He's just like a decent offlaner these days. Venge is just a weird hero, kind of like, does it play 3 or does it play 4? You kind of want it to play 4 because it's not as good as a 3 at the 3 position, but then you really want to get your ag. So if it's a very good game, like this hero, the reason why it's down here is because it's really not as much a carry from the offlane, which is very popular right now. But if you have like really hard carries in the mid and in the carry position, then you can totally pick this and it can be viable. Kind of in the same way that like Dazzle's viable as an offlaner mid, but it's not really like a carry kind of thing. Venge is a similar kind of style in that way. And then we have Huskar. This hero's decent, I think, and can actually be picked in the offlane, but it's just not the best. Honestly, I might even suggest or think about putting it in D if it wasn't for the fact that it's like a very cheesy hero that can actually just snowball games and win you games where people don't expect it. And then Doom, another one of these weird heroes that's like, I don't know, they've adjusted how this hero works a bunch. It's not nearly as good, I think, as it once was. It was kind of broken maybe 6 months ago or whenever that was, and now it's just not nearly as good. I think there's things about it that just, there's a lot to be desired. You know, I can just see so many situations where you're getting off dooms and it doesn't really matter because it's all about like your team has to commit at the right time, you have to doom the right target and all these different things where your impact is just, that's all it really is. It just doesn't feel that great, especially at lower MRs. You want to be doing more like right-click damage and all that kind of stuff. Not just like going in, dooming somebody, and then like pushing the fight, pushing the fight whenever you get the doom off. A lot of times it can feel like it can be wasted. Then lastly, for viable heroes, we have D tier. I'm just putting these, you know, like in Beastmaster down here because they're just, one, they're not really popular right now. But two, I just think at lower MRs, they're really bad. Just the tempo, how they work, the ability that people have to play them well at low MMRs just doesn't feel good. And I've seen a lot of games where these heroes do well in, you know, the first 20 minutes and they just fall off completely because their team just doesn't know how to play around them and they don't know how to play with those timings. Then Mars is just kind of like the worst of the traditional offlaners. This hero's been nerfed into oblivion. Maybe that'll change anytime soon, but it's also not really a carry from the offlane. It's more control, and there's a lot of other heroes you would rather have than Mars, like, you know, Magnus or whatever. And then Veno, it's annoying. I mean, it can work. I think it's maybe better in higher MMRs, but in lower MMRs, this hero just, you gotta get the laning stage right. You gotta have a good support. You gotta play with tempo and with pressure and play for that early game. Just be super annoying, but you don't just want to sit back and farm, and you're not really a carry. You're just, it's very awkward to play this hero as a 3 position. Darkseer used to be very good. I think I don't like the hero. I put him down here. Just in general, I don't like to put him high up on the list, but I just think with the recent patches, he's not as good. But also in the lower, you know, the lower you go in this hero with MMR, I just think the worse it's going to be because people just, you're just basically giving the enemy carry a free lane. You have to coordinate around, you have to be really good at the hero, and then you have to coordinate around your support to dominate a lane. Like, you can dominate some lanes. I've seen it happen. You know, good Darkseers will like pressure a lot, but that's just not happening in lower MMRs. I don't think you're going to be good enough, and you have to have the, you have to have a good support to do that too. Like, you can't just go in by yourself usually because you're going to get turned on. It's not going to be good for you. You're just going to have to run away, and you're just basically, because of all that, you're giving the enemy carry a free lane, and you're not really like, you're this weird utility hero. Yes, you can do a lot of damage, but it's more like utility damage. It's not like, you know, straight up right click damage like some of these other heroes. Death Prophet just has been a dead hero for a long time. I talked about it in the mid tier list. It's just, you know, ever since they changed the Spirit Siphon, it's not that great with all these tanky heroes now in the meta, and then you have to commit your ultimate, and that doesn't feel very good. Wind Ranger, it is kind of like a carry from the offlane, but it's not a great one right now. Like, it just doesn't feel great that you're just kind of a single target hero where, you know, obviously Necro's kind of a single target hero, but he has, like, he does damage in an AoE, just constantly ticking you down. Very good against strength heroes. This hero, not so good against, honestly, almost any hero these days, it feels like. Marcy, just not really great as an offlane, more as support, but even then it's not so popular right now. I mean, it's semi-viable, like you could still pick it, but that's why it's D tier, but still not great. Tusk, same thing, more of a support, I feel like. Semi-viable, but not great. I thought Omni Knight was kind of on the up and up, but he's fallen off. He's really not that popular anymore with all these like kind of more carry offlaners. He just feels like he doesn't have a place right now. But I still think he's possible. You can still play him if you try to play this weird carry build with him. Like you do a lot of damage, but it's just not that good. You'd almost rather pick like any other hero for that. And then these last two cheese heroes, Broodmother, Visage, they're decent, okay, in the sense of like if you're gonna pick a cheese hero, you can pick them. But honestly, just like if you're gonna learn any kind of micro, just learn Lone Druid, dude. I mean, this guy has been good, even like kind of sneaky good for a long time. I don't really think even if it falls off, quote unquote, like yeah, it doesn't have the patches like Brood or Visage in like the last few years where it's been broken. But even when it's not broken or it's not picked that much, I think it's still definitely viable. It's almost like always viable. And I think this patch is like the best patch to learn this hero. And just, I don't know, honestly, don't even play either one of these. Then lastly, F tier, Enigma, just a terrible hero right now. Just this hero needs buffs. Don't play it. Support, Phoenix is not a good offlane right now. Bat, not great right now. If anything, very bad, horrible, just don't pick it. Underlord, they've been trying to bring it back, but it's just terrible. Like, it's just all utility, not good. Nature's Prophet, just more of a support. I don't love him as a support, but he's more of a support now since the changes. Nyx Assassin, definitely more of a support. Not an offlaner. Winter Wyvern, not an offlaner since the universal nerfs. And then Snapfire, they killed this hero. This hero is absolutely dead. Do not pick it. So that is my offlane tier list for patch 7.34e. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know if you liked the video by liking, commenting, and subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.